the following case, right? Again, if you don't care about meaning or know that it's an issue until Jordan points to it. And then I think, I'm not sure that I could do this. This is a tall order, but I think that if pressed and given enough time, I could fit all of Jordan's stuff in Vervaeke's meaning framework very easily. Like, I think it drops right in. A lot of stuff drops in very quickly. There's a few things that I'm not sure. Like, I'm just not sure, right? Like, I don't know, right? But I would make the case that that can be done. And then I think that when you have a science of meaning, now you can talk to people about it. And the thing for me was, oh, well, now there's a vocabulary for this. And then, wait a minute, all these people are running around in a meaning crisis? Like, how did that happen? Like, I don't have a meaning crisis. What's wrong with these people? Like, wait a minute, I had a meaning crisis. I was homeless, living in the car in the winter in New England, man. Like, I fixed all this. Like, I can help. Like, I can do something to fix these people. Like, now that I can talk about it, now that I have language to talk about it. And then I went and I knew what Jordan did. I know exactly what Jordan did. He took people, and I'm going to invoke Descartes here, and I'm always very careful when I do that because you should be. He took people in a particular location, we'll say in life, right? And like, location's a fuzzy thing, right? It's a big sphere of something, right? And he built them a path and walked them along the path. And that path leads you from, we'll say, scientific thinking into religious thinking, right? And that's basically how he saved those people. Now, my theory is, or my hypothesis, I should say, I'm trying to be rigorous. My hypothesis is that we need more of those paths. So we need more paths, same ending point maybe, but different starting points. And then how do we build those? And that is what launched the project that Manuel and Andre, and now we've got guys like Nathan and Michelle, and too many other people to name. Matthew's helping us out, Jonathan's helping us out, a bunch of people all helping us out. Some of them are helping out just by asking what they deem as dumb questions, which aren't dumb questions. Like, if you've got to ask me what the parabolic is, that's my failure to explain.
Hi, this is Paul, and today, Mark, I don't know how to say your last name unless you don't want to say it.
Lefebvre.
Lefebvre. Okay, I thought it was something like that. So this, I'm on today with Mark Lefebvre, and I've some of you know Mark from the Awakening from the Meaning Crisis Discord server. Some of you know him from the Bridges of Meaning Discord server. Some of you know him from talking with Mary Kochan on her channel, with Manuel. He's done a couple of conversations, and I've been really interested in what Mark and Manuel have done. But I've gotten to know Manuel a little bit on the Bridges of Meaning Discord server, but I never had a conversation with Mark. So I said, Mark, you and I got to talk because you got a lot of interesting ideas, and I want to be able to pick at them a little bit. But before I do any of that, I want to know who you are, because I think part of the reason we're having such poor conversations is because we know each other in these little siloed spaces. And if we know each other more broadly, then maybe we'll actually know each other better. And that gets it. I mean, I think we're probably going to do a lot of talk about knowing and how to know today. So Mark, thanks for being willing to come in this morning and open yourself up to my pastoral nosiness. And I'm not gonna try and make you say anything you don't want to say, but I am curious about who you are. So let's begin at the beginning. Let's start talking about yourself, and I'll start asking nosy questions.
All right, Paul. I wonder. I've been, ever since the possibility of talking to you came up, I was like, oh no, he's going to ask me all these questions about me, and then I was like, oh wait, I don't have answers for this stuff. What am I going to do? So I was wondering if maybe, I was thinking maybe the approach would be, I can give you a proximal history of how I got to this corner of the internet, and then we could go back and just do a whole thing. Does that sound like a fun thing to try?
Let's give it a shot.
Sure. So I fell into the Jordan Peterson thing at an important time of my life. My mother was going through cancer treatments. And so that was like a whole thing, obviously, right? And I'm an information hound. So I was just watching Jordan Peterson. I'd watch 2 Maps of Meaning lectures and then one of his other talks. And at the time, partially because I was taking care of my mother, and partially because of the fact that I could get away with it. I wasn't actually engaged in full-time employment. So I was able to do, I just, what'd you do today, Mark? I watched 20 hours of YouTube, you know? Oh, really? Yes. That's why I'm sleep deprived. And then that led me to, so like I've literally absorbed like 90% of Jordan's, anything that I know of that Jordan's put out, right?
Yep.
I've watched almost all of it.
Yep.
And then that led me to some other folks, but mostly, John Vervaeke's work. And I feel like I've been tricked, actually. John doesn't know this story. So what happened was I caught the first drop of Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. And either it was made clear and I'm an idiot, which is totally possible because I'm an idiot all the time, or it was never made clear that they were 50 hours of lectures and they were dropping them one a week, because had they told me that, I would have waited for them to drop and then watched them all, because that's what I do. Interestingly, I do not binge TV shows very often, but I do binge like lectures because I want to get the whole flavor of the thing.
Yep.
So yeah, I feel cheated, and I'm still angry at John, literally, because that's part of me, right? It's And then interestingly, what happened was he dropped this meditation series, and I was like, oh well, I want to support him. Like I can't support him financially because jobs and whatever,
Right.
but I owe it to him to support him. And I had done meditation when I was younger, and I had my own method and like my own strategy for meditation, and it was based around efficiency and all of this. And so I was like, oh, whatever. I just want to support the guy. So I was there, and I was on the YouTube live chat because there were live streams, and I'm talking to people in the live chat because, and this is the problem, right? Like, who are you, Mark? So Mark found out as the result of that, that I grew up online. Like I literally grew up in the old days on bulletin board systems.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah. Yeah.
that's how I learned to socialize. So when I go someplace online, I build community. I'm a professional online community builder in some real sense. Like I know how to do this. I've been doing it literally my whole life, more than my adult life, we'll say. And so I built or helped to build this Sangha for him, right? Because I was there all the time, and he comments on it in the meditation sits. So he's constantly dropping my name.
Yeah.
And then another weird thing happens, right? So he's dropping my name, and I'm going, well, this is oddly satisfying. Why do I care? Like I am super disagreeable, ridiculously independent. Why do I get a rush off of this guy saying, "I'm so glad Mark's here"? Or, he
Sure.
gave me some really
Sure.
nice praise.
And John is extraordinarily generous,
Yeah,
with praise of others and crediting others. I mean, he right from the start, you notice that with his stuff.
yeah, and yeah, to your point, yeah, that's what I was about to say. John's so good at that, right? He's
Yeah.
so good at, and he's so aware that he's Canadian, which is important, and will become clear why later it's important. Because don't worry, I'll get back to that. That he's really good at being sincere and coming across the right way about the whole thing, and most other Canadians aren't. But yeah, we'll loop back on that one. So I'm figuring this out. I'm like, wow, what is going on? And then Brett comes on, and he's the one who started the Awakening from the Meaning Crisis Discord server. And he says, hey guys, I got a Discord server. We should all do this. We should watch, but we'll be on the Discord, but we'll be watching on our own computers. And we weren't doing the streaming thing at that time. And I was like, oh, okay, whatever. I'll check that out too. And at this point, I don't think I was quite fully aware that, oh, I build communities. Like I just like that's what I do. Like it's just a natural thing. I don't even think about it. It's like breathing, like doesn't everybody do this? So I jump on there, and we're getting organized, and we have a nice little group of people, and then we're doing these things together. And then John starts promoting the Discord server, and John comes on to the Discord server and gives these Q&A sessions. And at one point in one of the sessions, I'm like, John, like you're like, I haven't had a teacher in years. You're like the first teacher I've had in so long, I can't even remember. And thank you for that. And of course, he was very humble and received that with the good grace that only John can. Apparently, like
Yeah.
he's
Yeah.
amazing, right?
Yeah.
And so yeah, it was like a real revelation. Like, wow, I have a teacher. Like somebody taught me a thing I didn't learn on my own because everything else I learned on my own. So it was very gratifying. And then we got together. Manuel in particular did a lot of work putting together videos. So now we have John's teaching us every day. We sit every day on the Awakening from the Meaning Crisis Discord server in the meditation, and we also discuss his other course, Cultivating Wisdom, which is based on the book Wisdom of Hypatia. And we have very deep conversations after the meditation. Some of your people actually floated over to hear some of they're very deep conversations. And anybody's welcome. You don't have to sit with our video. You don't have to sit in John's style or any of that. And it was interesting too, because as I went through the meditation series, I'm slowly realizing like, wow, this is a pretty interesting approach to meditation. And granted, my knowledge of meditation is old. I did it when I was basically a kid. I don't think I was 18 when I came up with all my meditation strategies. And I used to sit like 4 times a day. Like it was, I was very rigorous. I'm a very rigorous person under normal circumstances. Um, and so, I mean, I had my method. It was the best method ever. Duh. Right. And then I realized like John's method is better. Oh, damn it. Why did you do that? So I'm angry about that too. I haven't told John that, but now he knows. It's on the internet. So I'm still angry. The Discord people get a kick out of this, right? Because it does come up from time to time. Yeah, there's little things like John comes up with this chanting thing, and I actually know the science on chanting pretty well. And he goes, oh, it's one chant Om. It's like, yeah, no kidding. That's all chants start with Om. Like, big deal. A lot of them end with Om too. Like, whatever. And then he goes, you only need one other syllable. And my brain's going like, uh, yeah, this is why academics shouldn't be allowed to engage. I was I was like, there's no way. There's no way. This is ridiculous. And then it's one. And I'm like, that's even dumber. Like, you're not even staying in the Eastern style. Like, this is stupid. Like John's just like, he's off the rails. He's lost it. I don't know what's going on with John. And then, so we have the lesson and then we do the chanting in the lesson, right? And then like I'm like, I don't know what just happened to me, but a bunch of changes just happened to me, and I'm like freaked out. I'm like, why did that work? How did that work? Holy macaroni, what is going on? Like it was really stunning. And then of course everybody else is like, well, I didn't get anything out of it, and I'm like, guys, I'm an experienced meditator. Like this is like you can't compare you to me. You guys have just started, and I was doing meditation, pretty much on and off my whole life. So yeah, it was very interesting. So yeah, that's sort of how I, you know, ended up. And then we got into, this types of knowing thing, right? John doesn't like our model. John likes John's model. Of course, he should, right? He's got friends in CogSci. He's the director of CogSci at the university, right? And I don't have any friends in CogSci, at least none that I know of. And if I did, then maybe I lose a few friends. But like our models for a different purpose, right?
Yep.
It's not to please cognitive scientists. So,
Yep.
so yeah, and I've had a lot of great help. We couldn't come up with the model, especially the name parabolic, without Andre and without Manuel. Manuel's been just, he's brilliant. It's really hard to tell who's leading the thought on the server, right? Sometimes it's Manuel, sometimes it's Mark, right? And every once in a while, somebody else, right, just like blows us all away with one little sentence or line. And sometimes they're not even aware, right? They're not even aware of how big what they said was and how much it helped everybody else, think things through. So yeah, that's sort of how I ended up as a result of that model. Of course, right? You guys, right? Your community got interested in it, and
Yep.
then basically, Manuel sort of, I don't know, poisoned the well, right? He's like, oh, Paul, you're gonna pay attention to this, right? And then once you get interested in it, your whole community gets interested, and then I'm getting bombarded, and I'm like, well, now I have to go over there and spend some time over there, right? And that's been great. I mean, thank you for building such a wonderful community and being such a great exemplar that they have these difficult conversations, that can get very contentious.
Yeah.
Um, And despite the fact that, and I say this with the most love, crazy Christians, um, they seem to do pretty well, right? They're not out there trying to convert people to whatever odd cult-like version of Christianity they all seem to have, um, which is not uncommon. It's like, what do you all believe together? Jesus. Oh, okay. As long as we have the one thing, I guess we're all Christians. It's good, right?
That's
So yeah, it's sort of interesting. So
that's about as much commonality you're going to find on that server.
exactly, and not even that much. I mean, some
Yeah,
people come
yeah.
in and they've got the postmodern ethos, and they're like, "No, your religion sucks," and it's like, well, "Why are you here again?" Because
Not
well,
because the
weird, but
people are nice
the
and they're
people, well, the
available.
people are nice, and people want to be with other people,
Yeah,
and yeah,
yeah, yeah. Well,
yeah,
I am going to go back, and I want, because see what you just told me just makes me even more interested and more nosy. So now I'm going to start doing my thing. Tell me about the home you grew up in.
sure. So I was gonna get there, Paul. Don't worry,
Oh,
but it's
I know
fine.
you were going to get there. I was going to make you get there. So let's start there.
So let's see. My father is French Canadian on one side and French Canadian on the other.
Oh,
Hence
interesting.
the Lefebvre name, right? And
Yeah,
then
yeah,
I don't
yeah.
know if you know this, but like imagine a world where you were in the gorgeousness of France with the beautiful weather all year round. And the people were so miserable that you said, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to pack up. I'm going to take a boat ride over to the coldest country livable on the planet. And I'm going to hunt beavers in the woods rather than hang out with these people.
That's right.
Wow. Like, I don't know. Anyway, my mother's side, my mother's mother was Irish. She just passed away last year. Yeah, last around Thanksgiving, I think. Um, and my mother's father was Greek. Yeah,
Interesting.
yeah, very
Oh,
interesting.
it's very
Weird,
interesting. And how
weird.
did your parents meet?
That I don't know actually. No idea.
Really?
No
Huh.
idea.
Interesting.
No, don't remember. I know
So
that the families knew each other.
did you grow up in America or Canada?
No, no, we so my grandparents were both born, I think, in Maine on my father's side,
Oh,
and then I think Nana, my mother's mother, was born here, and I don't know where, and I think it's the same. It's one generation out for Grampy too,
okay.
if I
Okay.
remember correctly. And then so what happened is, they went to the immigrant city Lowell because that's where all the
Yeah,
immigrants
yeah,
were
I know
going for
Lowell.
years.
Yeah, yeah. I've
Yeah.
got
Oh, you
Massachusetts
do.
roots. Yeah.
Oh, I grew up in Lowell, so I'm a Lowell man.
Oh,
So
I visited Lowell, the factories and all that stuff. Because
amazing stuff.
my mother's family, and that's actually where my mother lives now, is in Whitensville, Massachusetts, which is down near Rhode Island. So
Yep,
yeah, I know
I know Whitensville.
Massachusetts. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I grew up in Massachusetts,
Okay.
primarily Lowell, when
Okay.
I was younger. My parents moved out to Kansas for about 4 years when my father got his PhD at Kansas State University,
Oh, and what?
and his in basically literature. So
Oh,
nothing
interesting.
useful. Yeah,
Now,
yeah, and then
did your parents go to church?
no, no, no. I was gonna get there, Paul. Man, rushy, rushy.
I don't have all morning. And you're a talker, so I'm gonna keep interrupting you. I'm
Fair
from New
enough.
Jersey. I don't have all these polite people. Oh, I'm sorry, I interrupted. I'm thinking, how do you have a conversation without interrupting? I don't know that this came into the culture, and I'm still a little peeved by it. But anyway, keep going.
So yeah, my parents sort of were both disaffected Catholics, as you can
Oh, okay.
imagine,
Yep. Yep.
right?
Yep.
And the whole family is disaffected Catholics, basically, right? So they're all like, "Oh, the Catholic Church, the nuns beat me with rulers," and it's like, fair enough, but really, like that's your complaint? Like, better complaint than that?
I
So
don't know. I grew up in Jersey. I heard a lot of people complaining about the parochial school and the nuns. So
all
that's
the
it. That's
time,
a thing. It's a thing.
all the time. Well, that's actually the Protestants' fault. So thank you for that, because had you not tried to indoctrinate the children of the Catholics, they would have been happy to go to your damn public schools. Paul, I'm putting it on your shoulders.
I'm Dutch Reformed. I didn't go to public school either. We were too Protestant to go to public school.
Oh, that's funny. I like that.
But they were parent run, not by the Pope.
There we go. There we go. Yeah, there's no papal conspiracy there. Yeah, so they were very much, 70s hippie ethos,
Okay.
right? Oh no, let
Okay.
him pick his own religion when he's ready. So like my mother brought me to a bunch of different churches, and I got to tell you, look, if you're going to celebrate your God, it's gospel, baby. You got to get up and you got to sing and you got to dance. I was like, right on, like that's great. That's absolutely great.
Those people know how to have fun in church. And if you're not going to have
Well,
fun in church, why be there?
how else can you participate in the glory of God? You dance and sing. Like,
That's right.
that works. That works. So yeah, so I wasn't grown up with any particular religion.
Okay.
My my parents got divorced when I was 7 years old.
Oh.
Yeah, and I was a latchkey kid.
So did you move to Kansas or did you stay in
We were in
Massachusetts?
Kansas for 4 years when I was super young, and then we moved back to Massachusetts.
Oh, and that's
So
where
I
they
didn't even go
divorced.
to school. I did go to a Montessori school actually in Kansas when I was really young. So I remember I know Frere Jacques because I remember it from the Montessori school. But it was an experimental school on Kansas State's campus. And I remember I had a Snoopy lunchbox. It was blue with a white Snoopy on it. It was very great.
So a little academic bubble in the middle of Kansas.
Yeah, yeah. And I got to see a baby tornado once, and yeah, we
Oh,
had
cool.
we had tornado bunkers. Yeah, it's very different. It's like, whoa. And that screwed up my New England accent. So then I would go back to New
Yeah.
England,
Yeah, you don't
right?
have
Because
it.
I was like 4 years old and I've got this hybrid accent, and then all my relatives are making fun of me, and fair
Yeah.
enough. But
Yeah.
yeah, it was interesting.
So
Yeah,
what did you like studying? What did you like studying in high school?
well, what happened was in junior high, well, I had a lot of problems with school, right? Because, they're trying to teach you stuff at the pace of a snail. And
Yeah.
I'm trying to learn stuff. And it's like,
Yeah. The school's getting in the
come
way
on,
of
guys.
learning.
Oh, it's terrible. It's absolutely terrible. And my father's got Encyclopedia Britannica and this how it works, right? So I knew like I just read stuff. And there was a thing back then where you could get a project sent to you every month. I know they've revived that recently. It went away for a while. So we do projects every once in a while. But basically because my parents were divorced and I was living with my father somehow, um, which turned out to be a good thing because my mother is completely nuts. Yeah, I didn't really find out how crazy she was until she was dying from cancer, and then like things
Oh.
started to fall apart.
Oh.
So yeah, it was interesting, but that's how I ended up down in South Carolina. So I
Wow.
yeah, yeah.
So you were, and so my wife and I, we homeschooled and very quickly learned that school too often gets in the way of learning, especially for a lot of kids, especially if you have a really smart kid at school. I mean, because they just have to teach to this mass of students, they have to teach to the average. And so if you've got a bright kid, that you want to unleash that kid and have that kid go. But obviously with your parents splitting up, I'm sure, then you've got, parenting is hard enough when there's two of you, but when there's one of you, it's a bit overwhelming. So where did you go to college? Did you go to college?
No,
You didn't go to
I went to
college.
no, not at all, not a lick. I know where college is, like I can point them out,
Well,
but
now
I didn't actually go
see,
to
this
one.
is why I ask all these nosy questions, because now the
I
picture's
would have
starting.
gotten there.
You're an autodidact. I know you'd get there, but you'd take a while, and I'm nosy and impatient. So, and it's my show. I get to ask the questions I want to
Yeah.
ask. So, okay. So, did you graduate high school?
Yes, but and I think this is important. So
Okay, I'll
I know
back
you're in a
off. I'll
rush.
let you tell it.
So when junior high came around, because I had some problems in school because they
Yeah.
wanted me to do homework. And I was
Yeah.
like, I'm not doing homework. What are you, high? Like, come on, I got things to do. So I ended up in some private schools. And so I went to a very exclusive private school, 100 kids, junior high and high school, 100 kids in the school.
Huh.
And yeah, and the interesting story about that is the ethics course. So they listed an ethics course. So I said, well, I'm not taking no religion, man. Give me the ethics course. So they have me read C.S. Lewis, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And I'm sitting in a room by myself because it's
This is
basically,
not a Christian school.
it is. It is.
Oh.
They were required by law, by state law, to offer an ethics course. And I was the only one who was like, I was completely, I mean, I'm disagreeable, obviously. I'm super
Obviously.
disagreeable.
Yeah.
So I was like, I want the ethics course. It says I can take an ethics course. I want to take an ethics course. So they put me literally in a room by myself for the ethics course, and I had to read the book. And I'm going through the book, and I get to the end of the book, and he's like, so what did you think about the lion? And I'm like, it's a children's fantasy novel. What do you mean? What did I think about the lion? You know, are you looking for like structural components here? Like, you know, what are you looking for? And he said, oh, the lion is Jesus. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, I don't know what are you on about? Like, what's wrong with you? Where are you getting this from? Like, totally, ironically, missing the parabolic. Like, if I had only known. But you know, I was the kind of kid that, you know, we had to buy our books. So my father brings me down, we buy all the books about 2 weeks before school. I get into school, and the first thing they tell me is, all right, we're only going to go through half of this book this year. And I'm looking at the guy like, I already read the damn book. What do you mean you're only going through half of it? I've read all of the books I bought. What do you mean we're only going through half of it? What is wrong with you people? I thought we were going to get another set of books midway through. And then people wonder why I don't want to go to college because, oh, it's 6 years to get a PhD. I'm like, all right, yeah, if it's more than 2, I'm out. I am not doing it. Like, no way. Like, I got things to do. I got things to do.
Okay. So what did you do?
So what I did was, my father got remarried when I was, what was I, like 15 or 16 or something. And I basically, he went off and bought a new house. My mother just bopping around wherever she was bopping around. I don't even know where she was. There were attempts to get back together and all that, you know, all the craziness. You know, all the craziness. I can't tell you stories you haven't heard better versions of.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then basically I was kept in Lowell because I had transitioned back into public school basically for sophomore year of high school. So I was basically staying with my uncle at the family home where my father grew up. So right in the Highlands of Lowell, the Upper Highlands, and you know, my uncle was the black sheep on that side. I had black sheeps on each side, right? He was master mechanic, absolutely brilliant with tools and with mechanical things, and super lovable. Like, he was just well liked, and every drug he could get his hands on, every single one. Loved to party. Yeah, yeah,
And you're 16, 17.
yeah. No, and he was excellent with it. He was like, he
Yeah.
would not even smoke marijuana with me in the house, right?
Yeah.
He'd
Yeah.
say,
Yeah.
he'd say like, I'll buy if you fly, right? And so I'd get free meal, you know, and I was working at UPS and going to school. And so I'd come out of school, not right away, but at 6 p.m. I'd go in for the UPS shift and shuffle boxes. And, you know, that was a union shop. Learned all about union shops. Union shops bad, right? They didn't like me at all. Well, you gotta slow down. What are you talking about? I've got to slow down. You want to go in the parking lot? We'll talk. We'll talk about slowing down. You don't tell me what to do. You ain't my boss. Oh yeah, I was not tell me to slow down. Hi, go away. I'm not gonna do that. I got work to do, man. So yeah, I blew the numbers out on the group because
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
would just
Yeah.
work. I would
Made them
just
all
work.
look bad.
And I'm a tiny guy, But I'm fairly strong. I always had good grip and stuff like that. And back when I was young, I was in reasonably good shape, and I could just work. I could work 4 hours. I picked up 2 shifts eventually. I was getting overtime. It was fantastic. You work 8 hours, you get 4 hours of overtime. Not bad. When you're a kid, you're making like $9 an hour, 9.5 bucks an hour. That's not bad. So in the process of all that, I basically, a manager came in, and his shtick was to accuse people of stealing, and that's how he made his way up in the ranks somehow. And so he accused me of stealing, and it didn't work. And then one day he pushed me too far, and I said, "Oh, look, it's right around Christmas time. I'll see you later." And because I knew he was screwed without me, because by
Yeah.
that point I
Yeah.
was a sorter on the line, and I
Yeah.
was their best sorter, right?
Yeah.
And so I
Yeah.
was like,
Yeah.
"Yeah, I'll stick it up your rear end. How's that, buddy?" And I walked, and they tried to get me back, like his boss's boss and all
Yeah.
that. They were
Yeah.
like, "No, no,
Yeah.
you got to come back." And I was
Yeah.
like, "No, I'm not coming back. You fire him, I'll come back."
Yeah.
And they wouldn't fire him, so I said, "I'm not coming back." So yeah, in the course, and right after that, what happened was, um, I got sick. It was right around Christmas time, and I went to stay with my mother, who was in Bedford, Mass. And my mother was my mother, so who knows? It's sort of hard to remember some of this stuff. This is
Mhm.
sort of the before time. Y- You'll get that in a second. And what happened was, my uncle basically said, "Well, screw you. I'm going to rent your room out." I'm like, "Dude, I've been gone for like 4 weeks. Like, what the hell?" So he brought all the stuff over, and it turns out it wasn't all the stuff, but he brought a bunch of my stuff over to my mother's. So I moved into my mother's. And then my mother, being nuts, started to flake out on me, like clean the house and do my laundry. And I'm like, "I'm not doing your laundry. Do your own damn laundry. I'm doing my own laundry. You can do your own laundry. I'm not asking you to do my laundry. What's going on?" Right. And then so I was cleaning the house, and then I figured out the trick to making it look like I had cleaned it when I didn't. I'm all about the shortcut. I got things to do, Paul. I got things to do. So, so she eventually threw me out. And I was like, "Okay, well then I'm gone. I'll see you later." And then of course she regretted it immediately. I'm like, "No, you
She
threw me
lost her
out. I'm out."
housekeeper.
Yeah, pretty much.
How would
I
I
didn't
throw
think
out
of
the
it that way.
housekeeper? I had free labor. What was I thinking?
I didn't think of it that way. Thanks for that perspective,
That's what
Paul.
pastors are for.
I know.
Afford other perspectives. So keep going. You're doing well.
So yeah, I ended up, because I was online with people. I knew people from online. That's all my friends were online by that point. I didn't have any friends from school. Like, I didn't go to college, obviously.
So
So
this is back in the days of bulletin boards where someone would set up a
yeah,
little 286 somewhere with a modem, and you could call in and you could swap files and you could chat. Yeah, I remember those days.
the first large online free multi-line bulletin board system, major BBS,
Yep.
as far as I can tell, was in Burlington, Massachusetts. It was called Argus.
Really?
And that's what I was on, Argus. And so a bunch of people know me from Argus, actually. Still to this day, I know people from that bulletin board system, right? They're still friends of mine that I talk to. So yeah, yeah, yeah. And then it was its own culture, right? It was its own thing. But those are the people I was hanging out with, were people who were in
Yeah,
college, and I'm
yeah,
sleeping on their floor,
yeah,
right?
yeah. Well, it's so funny because I've got people in my local meetup that I listen to your story, and you're telling a story that is not that different from theirs. And I won't out their names right now, but some of them are going to listen to this, and they know, and they're listening to you, and they're saying, this guy lived my life. The parents split up. The parents had issues of their own. They were too smart for school. They got into PCs early. They did the Commodore thing. They did the BBS thing. They were online. They were playing games. They didn't necessarily go through formal education. They made their own way. So what was the first, UPS, that's kind of a job a kid does. What was the first adult job that you got that really was maybe something that you had to actually put on not a company shirt for, but a shirt with a collar for? Or maybe you've never had one.
Well, because I was homeless, it got really interesting. My mother actually found me a job with a government contractor, because Bedford, Mass is where Hanscom Air Force Base is. So my first job was on Hanscom Air Force Base, working for the military, with some of the people who were on Argus from the base.
Fascinating.
Oh yeah, it's very fascinating. And so I was tied up in that, and then that didn't last long for various reasons. And then one of the people from Argus actually found me a job accidentally um, when he left his job, and then I was tech support, software engineer, and documentation. So my father used to do documentation. He ran the documentation department at Computer Vision. So he, and he had PhD in English Lit, right? And so, yeah, no problems with language. No problems with language. I had a college level vocabulary. I basically, when I went to the exclusive private schools, I went to two of them. One was called Westbridge, and the other was Austin Prep. Austin Prep's a bit larger. Westbridge is a tiny school. Like I said, that was just junior high. Austin Prep was just freshman year. I basically tested in. They were like, well, you have terrible grades and you never do homework, but look at these test scores.
Yep. Yep.
So,
Yep. Yep.
right.
Yep. Yep.
So I had a college level vocabulary, when I was real young. So that wasn't like we had the Encyclopedia Britannica. We had like 4 dictionaries, right? We had all this stuff in the house. So I just, read it all.
So when you were so now you're starting to get adult jobs, and what are you doing for fun? I mean, you mentioned that you had gotten into meditation at some point. Was that because of your hippie parents?
No, not really. So what really happened was just before I got my first job, I was completely homeless, and I was living in my car in New England in the winter,
Lovely.
which is not ideal.
No.
And normally, what I tell people is, you know what? You should get out. You should explore. You should try everything. Don't try that. Don't try. Do not explore this. You do not know.
I mean, all those
No.
YouTubes that make living in your car such a cool possibility, not so much fun, huh?
No. No. And I had splitting headaches. I had migraine headaches. I was getting about 4 hours of sleep. That's all I could get. And not contiguous. I could do 2 hours and then another 2 hours later. That was
Yeah.
the best I could do.
Yeah.
And I'm wandering around the streets of the city of Boston, suicidal and depressed and domicide, to use
Yeah.
John Vervaeke's term,
Yeah.
right? Like personal domicide, right? I
Yeah.
don't have a home,
Yeah.
literally at all. I
Yeah.
don't have a place to be. I don't have a family support network anymore. I had reached out to family and they didn't help for whatever reasons. Some of them, oh, we
Wow.
didn't know, right?
Yeah.
One year I got uninvited to Christmas,
Wow.
which I didn't know about because I was living on the streets.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
I only found out about it because I ran into my uncle in a place that neither of us should have been in. And so that was an interesting little thing.
Hmm.
And, it was because of basically I effectively have an evil stepmom, and I'm using the word evil as in evil, like
Yeah. Yeah.
biblical evil. She's
Yeah.
not a good person. Like
Yeah.
nothing about her is good.
Yeah.
She just has no goodness in her,
Yeah.
and she had a need to control, and
Yeah.
she's very good at that.
Yeah.
She has a degree in psychology of some kind, I believe. So that'll be important later. And yeah, basically, I couldn't live with my father and I couldn't live with my mother. So I was out on the streets, and I got my act together and sort of figured out how to get a job. And
Yep.
I had no free time because I had to take the train out of Boston because it was free outbound in the morning, and then I would walk to my job in Winchester, and Winchester has 2 train stops in it. Actually, it's the place with the 2 closest train stops in the world, or something. I forget. Anyway, and then I would walk and take the bus back into town to get back in. So my travel time was like 3.5 hours or something
Yeah.
every day to
Yeah.
work.
Yeah.
But I was a software engineer.
Yeah.
I was
Yeah.
able to write this documentation and do all the tech support for the product. I was a one-man company, and he had other companies in the building. It was one
Right.
building, right? But he had like 3 different companies, and I did a lot of work with the software. I learned a lot of stuff. And because I was in Boston, I had also been hanging out at the GNU Labs
Yep.
with Richard Stallman and those guys. So
Okay.
they all know me. I don't know if they remember me, but they
Yeah.
all do know me.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I was very embedded in sort of that world. And then they had a whole thing where what they were doing was sort of the hippie adjacent people. They had houses and they'd name them, right? Because that was their thing, right? When
Yeah.
you're young and you're hippie-ish, that's what you do. And
Yeah.
then they had a thing called open parlor night, and it's like every Tuesday or something, you'd go to somebody's house, and then because I was in with them and they were in with the Free Software Foundation, or what became the Free Software Foundation, um, there was an opening in one of the houses, and I got into that house, and then it was like, oh, okay, so big, beautiful Victorian house, right in Somerville, Mass, right, one of the highest populations in the world at the time, literally more densely packed than Mexico City or number two.
Wow.
Like that, yeah, it's Somerville, Mass is a really interesting quirk of the
Huh.
universe. Highest per capita artists and
Huh.
musicians in the world at the time. Yeah,
I'm gonna have to
yeah.
look this up next time I get over there. This is
Yeah, yeah,
interesting.
yeah, yeah. And Whitey Bulger's the next hill over, just to tie it all together. Not that I knew that
Interesting.
at the time, but
Yeah, yeah,
yes.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So we had this
Fascinating.
house. The guy who owned it with his sister, but he was a real estate guy.
Hmm.
But this particular house he didn't care about, and he was just trying to screw his sister. So we've got zero rent, right? The rent's
Yeah.
really, really low, even for Somerville, which are already not high rent. And it was a wonderful location. And I could walk down to Harvard Square, and I did quite often walk down to Harvard Square. I wrote poetry when I was down there. I talked to people. I would hang out with the homeless crowd, which I
Yeah.
was had an affinity for,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And they weren't real homeless people, by the way, but yeah, that's another story. Rich kids LARPing. Ah, anyway, yeah, you learn a lot down there. You also understand when you talk to people from Harvard that they're not good people on average, and that Harvard makes them worse people on average,
Mm,
pretty
mm.
reliably.
How so? Tell me
So,
more about that.
well, they get very snooty. I don't know if you ever
Yeah.
saw Good Will Hunting. Good
Yeah.
Will
Yeah.
Hunting is one
Yeah.
of my
Yeah.
very favorite. Yeah, that is just
Yeah.
accuracy,
Yeah.
man.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
I think that's just like somebody that all that happened to somebody in exactly the way laid out in the movie. Like I
Yeah.
could totally see that.
Yeah.
I'm familiar with all these places. I know
Yeah.
Southie, right?
Yeah.
You know people like that if you're in Boston. These
Yeah.
people who have super good memories. I have a
Yeah.
good memory. I don't have an eidetic memory.
Yeah.
Every once in a while, I can see pictures and read things off the pictures, but
Yeah.
no, at a
Yeah.
daily basis, no, right? So yeah, so the Harvard people are like that, and they're very predictable. And I remember years ago I was on I think it was Yahoo Chat, one of the Yahoo Chat systems back when that was a thing, and somebody came in and he was ragging on my peeps. He's ragging on my peeps, man, and I got tired of it, and I said, listen, I understand that you're a Harvard boy, but you do not have more degrees than anybody who frequents this channel. So maybe you should be a little more respectful. And he went, how did you know I was from Harvard? And I'm like, really? All you Harvard guys talk the same, right? And so then I was like, yeah, you really don't understand, do you? You're not in the same place you think you're in here. You can't come in here and just say, oh, I have degrees and therefore, right? And he doubled down, and I took him out. I took him out completely psychologically, and he left the channel.
Yeah.
And as far as I can tell, he never came back,
Yeah.
right? Because I was like, no, you're not coming in here dissing. These people are being nice to you, and you're just being a jerk from Harvard. Like, go
Yeah.
away.
Yeah.
So yeah, Harvard, just because of the training and because of the prestige, and some of the teachers in there, they're not the best people in the world, and
Yeah.
so a lot of the most amoral people in the world, I would say, that I have met have been Harvard grads,
Yeah. Yeah.
and it,
Yeah.
it really breaks my heart. It's a beautiful campus,
Yeah.
and they have a wonderful library, right? And
Yeah.
and they just seem to churn out the same type of bad people for some reason. It's really disappointing.
So where did meditation come into your life? How did you get into that kind of stuff?
Well, when I was living with the weird hippies, my first job, I'm a software engineer. They're all software engineers. They're working at like FTP Software and some of these early companies, right?
Yeah.
And I'm just trying to be more efficient, right? I'm trying to get stuff done. I'm trying to figure out, well, why was I able to live, to survive physically, on almost no food because I
Yeah.
was homeless, and no sleep. Like, what is that? So I started on this sleep thing, and I figured out a method to get people down to sleep about 4 hours a night. And it turns out that if you do that correctly, it takes some time. I'm halfway through finishing the instructions for this. My third revision over the years. I keep rewriting this for people. Um, It turns out if you do it right, you keep your brain in alpha state more and you can learn better and your memory's improved. So like less sleep is better for you, and you're actually addicted to sleep most of the time. And if you can get it down to 6 or 4 hours a night, then you can be fine and in fact a better person. So it actually increases everything about you. And so I was doing meditation. I was doing this sleep reduction stuff. I had one person tried it along with me who lived in the house. She was full-time student, full-time job, learned Chinese in a year.
Wow.
And she, yeah, years later, like 15 years later, I found her at the science fiction convention, Aresia, which is one thing that I was involved in with these hippie folks, who I miss dearly sometimes, by the way. As much as I wanted to murder them all then, and still want to murder some of them now. Um, Wonderful people. They had this science fiction convention, and she happened to be there, and I happened to be back after an absence of like 5 or so years. And she said, I tell people all the time when they ask me how I learned Chinese so fast while going to school full time and also having a full time job, that it was the Mark Lefebvre, and she calls it the sleep deprivation program. And I'm always like, oh no, not deprivation, bad word, bad word. So yeah, it's interesting. So a number of people went along that journey with me, we'll say, but I was all about like efficiency and getting stuff done and learning quicker. And I think maybe 3 years ago, I was up north visiting a friend of mine, Gina Bean, who runs the Mindful Boston, which everybody should check out because Gina's like one of the best people you're ever going to meet in the whole world. Um, she grabbed a book, and it was a book written by one of the Google engineers. It was an older book, and she said, Mark, did you read this? And I'm like, oh no, I know who that guy is. I saw one of his YouTube talks. And she goes, all of the stuff you talked about when we were living together is in here. And I'm like, oh, good. Well, I'm not too surprised, but that's great. And then I'm like, you should have written a book, you moron, right? Like, oh well. So, but I'm very private and I'm very independent. So, and I've been very successful being that way.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
don't do that either, by the way. Yeah, bad. No, no. Community good, lone wolf bad, lone wolf
Yeah.
die,
Yeah.
lone wolf very bad, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, that was how I got involved in all that stuff. I was just exploring hypnosis and meditation and the Kabbalah and tarot cards and all of that stuff. And it took me all this time and the help of my dear friend on the Discord, Andre, we were taking a break from trying to figure out how to get people to archetypes. And we were going through the tarot deck as our break, and then it was like, wait a minute, what is going on here? Like, tarot cards seem to be a way of making a generic narrative that coheres to your narrative and allows you predictive capacity.
Huh.
How does it do that? And thus was born the parabolic.
So let's talk about the parabolic a little bit, because this is, I mean, again, part of the reason I want to get a taste of your story, and all you can really get in, even a short time like this is a taste. It's you're an interesting pair, obviously, with Mary Kochan, because Mary, she was one of the first people on my channel, and of course I pestered her with questions too, and she came on my channel because she found me because of the algorithm and Jordan Peterson, and I was a Christian, and she had gotten out of Jehovah's Witnesses, and she wanted to talk about cults, and of course she's Roman Catholic now, and so and then she came up with this parabolic, and then you jumped in. And I remember when she first started talking about the parabolic, it was like, what is she talking about? Is it, and when she was talking parabolic, I was thinking parabolas. I was thinking parabolas. I mean, I'm a Christian minister. I should probably think Jesus parables or something like that. But so, well, I'm still really nosy, because I'm getting sort of, you saw that movie Memento, right? the guy who
Yes.
takes all these Polaroids and he can't manage time. And I'm kind of having that with your story, and I'm getting lots of snapshots here, but I'm trying to sort of line them up. And so I have a, a picture of your upbringing and your parents divorced and your homelessness and your UPS and your software engineer and documentation. Of course, I imagine these software companies are always hungry for some people to do documentation, because that's probably the job that all of the software engineers with any status say, no, I don't want to do any documentation. I just want to, I have a brother-in-law who's a software engineer in the Boston area. And so I know that type too. So, and now I get a sense of, okay, you were doing some communal living, and and my sense among the technology community is that, I mean, similar to how you described, okay, what are you trying to do with sleep? You're trying to do sleep efficiency. You're trying to
Hmm.
say, hey, there's only 24 hours in the day. I'm blowing a third of my life unconscious. What kind of a crazy strategy is this? And they tell me I need to. Why? What happens if I can cut that in half? And so, and I can so a lot of this, whereas for religious people hearing this story, they're going to hear this sort of through a religious valence. You're like many in the tech sector, coming at it much more in terms of a hacker ethos, to say, hey, we're human beings, we have code, we have systems, we should study these systems and figure out how we can be more efficient in order to do some of the things that we want to be doing and to make the world better and all this stuff. So I say, I'm getting this picture. Also, obviously you're low in agreeableness. I mean, when we started the the meetup here, one of the things that became obvious very soon on the Jordan Peterson meetup was that we had a whole herd of people who are low in agreeableness all in one room. And actually, for, it was our good pleasure that most of these people also, as with yourself, is also socialized. So you can be low in agreeableness, but you're not actually throwing things around or knifing people or anything like that, which would tend to be a problem at a meetup. So we got all these low in agreeableness people who are also quite intelligent. And so what we usually have is really interesting conversations, because people aren't just sort of, assuming a line in order to get along with people. They're actually, hey, no, wait a minute. And they'll argue the other side, even if they don't believe the other side, just because that interests them. So you're doing the software thing, and you've got a real job, and you're doing all that, but that doesn't, and then, early on, you mentioned that, your mother was going through cancer treatments. And so that's when you started listening to, so even though you described your mother a number of times as crazy, and she kicked you out of the house, and your father, you have an evil stepmother, all this stuff going on in your life, you still, at the same time, this is your mother. And when she gets cancer, you care for her.
Yeah.
That's, and that's, it doesn't surprise me, but I think it's an important thing to say, because a lot of people who don't spend a lot of time around people who are low in agreeableness would misunderstand when they hear you call your mother crazy. They think of that as, oh, he's insulting his mother. And for you, it's like, no, I'm just describing her.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
She's crazy, but I love her. She's still my mom. Yeah, she kicked me out. I understand that, but she's still my mom. So, I'm trying to line up some of these
Yeah.
pictures to sort of get us to closer to where we are right now, and then we can get over into the knowing and a bunch of the stuff that you've been working on, because I want to get into some of that stuff too.
Yeah. So I mean, what happened was I didn't stay a software engineer. I actually had an offer from the GNU Labs at one point, and in stupidity, I didn't take it because I didn't understand how jobs worked and that you could have two. Because back when I was young, I was like, no, 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 you get a job and you go,
Yeah,
and you
yeah,
stay there forever, sort of a
yeah,
thing. And I didn't really understand. I had a full time job. You guys are 2 months late. Like, had you, and I didn't really realize they didn't care. They're a bunch of hippies. If I put in 2 hours a week, they'd have paid me for it and been happy.
yeah,
So I never understood that. And then what I did was I went into more of the system stuff and tech support and through that route, because that's where the money was. It was harder to get a software engineering job, and software engineering wasn't. It was a particularly turbulent market back then, right? You were either a high-end software engineer or you were going to be in a low-end shop, and that really didn't appeal to me. because the money differential was crazy. But they didn't have enough tech support people, so I went into tech support. Also, had to be on the phone. Mark does not like to talk on the phone. Still does not like to talk on the phone. Still, like, calling somebody is like, I don't know. What do I say? Like, I don't have a script for that. Like, what the hell, right? Like, I have some scripts now, so I do much better in the world. But like, ultimately, no, I don't. I'm always like, oh, it's been too long. What do you say? I got all that anxiety, right? And so I'm like, no, no. What you need to do is you need to go into tech support where you're on the phone all the time. That's what you need to do. So I did, and I made good money doing it. And I was a top tier tech support engineer. I was the only guy in the shop allowed to work overtime without approval because they were like, look, you're getting all these calls. In fact, I blew the record out at NEC for calls taken in all the tech support departments. And our tech support department had the second hardest calls because we were doing CD-ROMs and SCSI and all this complicated technology. I did something like 220 calls in 8 hours.
Oh,
Oh yeah, no, I hit it out of the park. Yeah, I
wow.
beat the previous record by 12 calls or something
Yeah,
stupid.
yeah.
And that guy worked 9 hours. He worked through his lunch. I did not, sir. Just saying. So yeah, but I'm highly competent. When I get into something, I get into it,
Yeah,
and then
yeah,
I learn it. And
yeah,
if I can't learn it, I get out. But if I can learn it, I do it, and I
yep,
do it at top level every
yep,
time.
yep,
And so most of my jobs were around what we would now call DevOps, but working with software teams and getting the infrastructure up and running that they need to run their software.
yep.
And I'm very good at that. It's systems work, so I understand how things fit together. But then I had a house for a long time. It got stolen from me.
Oh my.
The courts let the banks take it, a foreign bank, no less. I don't know why. 5 years, $50,000 later, and then
Wow.
I got to start over. And I had always had my eye on the South. I was like, no, I should be in the South. I shouldn't be in the North. And I never did it. Right? I could have done it sooner,
Yeah,
maybe.
yeah.
And my mother had moved down to South Carolina, down to Columbia. And then so while I was at the tail end of the house lawsuit, that unexpectedly I lost somehow, even though that's legally not possible. Um, I was down here anyway, and I was working remote, which was nice at the time. And mom had just gotten over her first cancer thingy, and I was living basically in her frog front room over garage. It's a southern thing. Um, and I had a bathroom. Like, I didn't need to leave really. It was
Yeah,
great.
yeah,
Bed, TV, little computer.
yeah,
Don't do that either. Horrible way to live.
yeah,
But I had a bunch of cash. I was going to buy a house.
yep.
So I ended up buying a house down the street, 12 acres of land. I have a pond. Pretty freaking good. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. I paid cash so no one can take it.
Yep,
Right.
yep.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I'm still paranoid about A, being homeless, B, now people not being homeless, but being homeless
People
because people
stealing your
decide they
house.
want your stuff. Yeah.
Yep.
um, and 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 then mom got cancer again, and
Hmm.
I was starting to realize, like, wow, she's pretty crazy, and then she had all these quirky behaviors. But
Yeah,
I was just like, whatever, people have quirky behaviors.
yeah.
But then, as she was actually dying with the second round of cancer that was much more virulent, I began to see that, like, she saw things that maybe she saw a bunch of things that are there that most people can't see. Fair enough, because like I'm all into that now. I'm like, okay, sure. I was always like that. I was like, "Oh, I'm not all science, man. I'm like, yeah, there's some stuff out there that we can't explain. Like, fair enough. But I mean, she was seeing some stuff that definitely wasn't
Yeah,
there,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Definitely wasn't there. And then
yeah,
what she would do is she would be able to justify her delusion somehow
yeah,
and make a coherent story out of it. And that
yeah.
was when I was like, oh, no, 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 mom's not smart, genius level, way past that. Like, how do you do? So I'm still doing it. I'm still like, how did she pull off some of this stuff? Like, how is that possible? Like, no one can be that smart. Like, you just can't be, right? And she had gotten remarried, and my stepfather had an unrecorded IQ. The guy knew everything.
Yeah,
Like, there were no questions he couldn't answer off the top of his head. It was
yeah,
I don't know if he had an eidetic memory or what was going on. I don't know how many books he read,
yeah,
but I'm not well read.
yeah.
Actually, I refuse to read the classics. I don't read any philosophy. I won't engage in that stuff. This guy read everything. So I could always just ask him a question and he would know the answer. It was very convenient. And towards the end of his life, he went blind, which is just like
Oh,
the biggest tragedy ever. He wasn't fully
oh,
blind. And then in the middle, my mother decided she was going to do chemo again after saying she was never going to do chemo again. Because chemo, I was
Yeah.
taking her to the chemo treatments.
Yeah.
You're a mess on chemo.
Yeah.
And then he had hatched a plan to take his own life in a way that she wouldn't find the body. And that
Oh,
was the day after my birthday. It
oh
was a
man.
bad week, Paul. It was a bad week.
Yeah.
And then I had to spend the week at her house because she had a very high up bed and she kept falling out of it trying to get into it, and somebody had to be there, and she wouldn't get the fall thingy, and she wouldn't
Yeah.
hire nurses, and
Yeah.
because she was crazy,
Yeah.
and she wouldn't
Yeah.
give up the bed. The bed's really high off the ground.
Yeah.
I actually I the estate got stolen from me. Everything gets stolen from me apparently.
Wow.
I wanted to burn the bed. I literally would have burned the bed. I would have put it somewhere and I would have lit it on fire. I was so angry about that
I
bed being off
believe
the
you.
ground. Yeah. Yeah, I'm very upset that I do not get to burn the bed. Yeah, plus all the stuff I lost, all the memories and
So
everything else.
your stepfather is gone, and now your mother is gone, and you're in South Carolina, and you're between jobs right now again. And so, because when I asked you, hey, when do you want to do this conversation? My schedule's pretty free. So, and so you're spending your time, on these Discord servers,
Yeah.
and having conversations like this, and trying to figure out knowledge. And so maybe a good pivot point then to, it's going to be, a lot. So in terms of the people who watch my channel, there are, I mean, my eclectic nature sort of breeds little, my mother only watches, in fact, I talked to my mother often on Mondays, and my mom said, any interesting conversations I want to watch? It's like all the other videos, she's like, I'm not going to listen to my son talk about this stuff, but if there's an interesting personality, I'll watch that conversation. So, because those are the only ones that are interested. Her son has mapped territory, the other people are not. So, and where was I going with this? So Vervaeke comes along, and did you find Vervaeke via the algorithm, or how did you get from Peterson to Vervaeke? That
Yeah,
wasn't clear.
the algorithm seemed to do it because I
Okay.
caught the FDMC right at the beginning somehow. And I mean, I had engaged with some of his stuff because, like, oh, he's talking about zombies. That's cool.
Okay.
And by the way, there are actual zombies in Scotland. Just go to Scotland and you'll see people walking around. And I assure you, they are zombies. They are not interacting with the world in any way you would expect. Not an American, anyway. I was like, I was like, wow, these people are really lost. Like, holy macaroni, they're
Well,
like
I know a lot of
gone.
schizophrenics in my neighborhood that I see them shuffle around, and it's like, yeah, zombies. And anyway,
Yeah, exactly.
so
So
you got,
so
go ahead.
yeah, I was interested in the Vervaeke stuff, and I had seen a couple of his videos. And when AftMC dropped, it just put me in there.
Yeah.
And so it's funny. I've been thinking about this a lot the past week. I don't think that without John's going to kill me. I don't think that without Peterson, you care about John's work. I think Peterson gives you a reason to care about meaning and think about whether or not your relationship to meaning, your participation in meaning, uh, so therefore John's, I would call it a science of meaning. That's what I think his
Yeah.
series
Yeah. Yeah.
is not
Yeah.
interesting. Like, it's
Yeah.
not an interesting thing to engage with, and a bunch of the people on the AftMC Discord server are Peterson fans.
Yeah. Well, it was, well, when I first, so who Strawn is. He's, I mean,
Yes.
he was, so I started making videos about Peterson, and then Strawn, I start getting emails from this guy, and they just keep coming. And if you know him, they just keep coming. And so, and then he's like, you really have to listen to this John Vervaeke guy. It's a colleague of Peterson. And then there's that old video of Peterson and Vervaeke talking to each other. And that was interesting. But then, of course, and then he had the Buddhism and cognitive science, but the sound was horrible on that. I couldn't really make heads or tails of it, because the sound was horrible. And then he started doing Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. And then, of course, I start playing around with his ideas, and then he contacts me, and we start having conversations, and on we go. But, when he basically framed Peterson's work as a meaning crisis. And when he sort of used that frame, because I was trying to figure out, I came across Peterson, and first it was the culture war stuff and Peterson's kvetching about pronouns and, oh, okay, but he wasn't an evangelical. And then he's doing a biblical series that's like, what's with that? And I start listening to his biblical series. It's like, he's definitely not a, religious, he's not a Roman Catholic conservative. He's not an evangelical conservative. What the heck is this guy? And so I'm trying to figure out what's going on with that. And then of course, one thing leads to another, and meaning, maps of meaning, there's all this meaning stuff. And then Vervaeke comes along and it's like, oh, well, now I think you're exactly right. There, you don't, you kind of need both of them to figure out, especially for a lot of people, because I was just talking, I mean, we all did. And I had a conversation with someone quite recently who, you know, just completely described what happened. It was, you found Peterson and it was like, oh, and then you just do we still don't have the right name for it. It just basically the Peterson dunk, where I would just then absorb hours of Peterson material. And in fact, I had one colleague of mine stop listening to Peterson because he said, I'm listening to more Jordan Peterson than I'm reading the Bible. And he's a pastor. He says, I probably shouldn't do that. So I'm going to stop listening to Peterson. So he stopped listening to Peterson because he was getting in the way of his Bible reading. So, but then of course, at some point you sort of map a lot of Peterson. And then of course, Vervaeke comes and it's like, oh, but John's work and his language is, whereas Peterson was just sort of, that's a slippery slope, baby. You get on there and whoosh, down you go. Vervaeke, it's a lot. Oh, wait a minute here. He's got all this new language going on. And, then I started talking about John Vervaeke on my channel, and people starting to complain. The Christians didn't like it because he sounded too Buddhist, and the Petersonians didn't like it because he wasn't Jordan. And, there's this whole thing. But no, you're exactly right. These two things very, very much fit together. And without Jordan, we wouldn't be having this little corner of the internet right now. So that's, again, and I still don't think, well, I don't know exactly how those pieces fit together, but what you just said right now, I think is true. That these things in fact do fit together. And John came along and, okay, now we're gonna have a science of meaning, and we're going to talk about this in a little bit more disciplined way, and we're going to try and show our work. And and so actually I talked to some people who are friends and colleagues of Jordan, and they're like, yeah, well, Vervaeke he's a traditional academic. What Jordan is Jordan. Guy's gonna buy a church, before he doesn't have to, which he doesn't have to now. But so anyway, I talked too long. You keep going.
Yeah, so I think I make the following case, right? Again, if you don't care about meaning or know that it's an issue until Jordan points to it, and then I think I'm not sure that I could do this. This is a tall order, but I think that if pressed and given enough time, I could fit all of Jordan's stuff in Vervaeke's meaning framework very easily. Like I think it drops right in. A lot of stuff drops in very quickly. There's a few things that I'm not sure. Like I'm just not sure, right? Like I don't know, right? But I would make the case that that can be done. And then I think that when you have a science of meaning, now you can talk to people about it. And the thing for me was, oh well, now there's a vocabulary for this. And then wait a minute, all these people are running around in a meaning crisis. Like how did that happen? Like I don't have a meaning crisis. What's wrong with these people? Like wait a minute, I had a meaning crisis. I was homeless, living in the car in the winter in New England, man. Like I fixed all this. Like I can help. Like I can do something to fix these people. Like now that I can talk about it, now that I have language to talk about it. And then I went and I knew what Jordan did. I know exactly what Jordan did. He took people, and I'm going to invoke Descartes here, and I'm always very careful when I do that because you should be. He took people in a particular location, we'll say in life, right? And like location's a fuzzy thing, right? It's a big sphere of something, right? And he built them a path and walked them along the path. And that path leads you from, we'll say, scientific thinking into religious thinking, right? And that's basically how he saved those people. Now, my theory is, or my hypothesis, I should say, I'm trying to be rigorous. My hypothesis is that we need more of those paths. So we need more paths, same ending point maybe, but different starting points. And then how do we build those? And that is what launched the project that Manuel and Andre, and now we've got guys like Nathan and Michelle, and too many other people to name. Matthew's helping us out, Jonathan's helping us out, a bunch of people all helping us out. Some of them are helping out just by asking what they deem as dumb questions, which aren't dumb questions. Like, if you've got to ask me what the parabolic is, that's my failure to explain. And fair enough, like, this is new stuff and it's hard, and I hope that I can help people understand it, because I think it is the most important thing, literally the most important thing, for the meaning crisis in that context, is understanding that you're missing a type of interaction with the world that is important. And if it accidentally leads somewhere you don't like, we'll say to the ineffable, then oh well.
Well, no, that was really good rant. And I really like how you framed it. Took people in a particular location in life, and he built them a path and walked them along the path from scientific thinking into religious thinking.
Right.
Tell me describe for me scientific thinking and describe for me religious thinking.
So John's term is religio. And then, of course, Andre likes to screw around with the EO idea. So we call it scientifio versus religio, because yeah, that's why, because we like to laugh and we love to laugh at ourselves. And sometimes we just start truncating words with EO all the time and just talk like that on the server because we can.
Hey, it worked for
Yeah,
Harry Potter.
exactly. Exactly. We're very Harry Potter. Yeah. So, I think basically there's within the model of the four types of knowing, there's a very clear thing here, and we're very informed by Struan, by the way. Very, like, I talked to him early on. He was on the AppDemc server. He gave me his rendition. I've talked to Voloskin. He's another one that he understands Struan's work better than Struan does, or at least can communicate it better, I think, according to Struan, not according to me. And so we've had a lot of conversations. They don't particularly like our mangling of John's model. John doesn't like our mangling of John's model even a little bit, obviously. Mary found it first. We found it going a different way, and the math works too, which is very interesting. This is Andre's very on about the math works. I'm like, oh yeah, the math does work. That's weird. And so we built up this whole thing with left brain and right brain. Struan uses particle and wave. I'm using a signal theory, right? That's how I started the conversation. That was my contribution, was no, we should start with signal theory. And then that means linear processing on the discrete side of the brain versus continuous processing, right, on the other side, where you're parabolic, you're not linear, you're not limited to single point connections, right? And you're not limited to connecting things to things only having one path. So one of the arguments I've made for our model of the four types of knowing is that it explains this phenomena that I used to encounter when I was hanging out with the hippies. So one of the games we used to play was, I would say, logic and reason are, and I use rationality, this is not John's definition of rationality, are maladaptive ways of understanding the world, because I can logically rationalize anything to you very easily. And so you give me an endpoint and I'll get you there and you won't be able to object. And this was a fun game for them because, first of all, they thought, like, there's no way you can do this. And it was a trick. And maybe I'm like one of a handful of people that can even do the trick, right? And I would tell them, like, I wasn't hiding the ball. I would say, no, I'm going to do this.
Yeah.
I'm not going to tell you exactly how I'm going to do it, but I'm
Yep.
going to lead you down a logical path.
Yep.
And I can justify anything. And then, of course, invariably somebody would choose the Holocaust, and I would be like, well, Hitler already did that, but if you want to go through it again, I'll take you there personally. And every time it worked, and every time the people involved admitted that it worked, they just didn't understand it. And I was like, well, that's because you're in a closed world. And if you can find the right starting point, it will lead to that ending point. And there may be more than one starting point that leads to that ending point, but you're stuck. And so we call this propositional and procedural stuckness, right? And because it's a discrete signal, because they're linear connections that are being made, you have to form a closed world. And a closed world is very safe and comforting psychologically. Everybody wants certainty. This gives you 100% certainty when you think on this side of the brain. But this is the scientifico, to mangle the word, side of the brain, right? And that's what we think, is that people are propositionally and procedurally stuck because, look, this has been a powerful tool. Everybody should engage in using this tool, but it's not the whole world. And this is where I have deep problems with John's work. I know you were on the AFT-MC doing a Q&A, and I asked you the question about what do you think about the two worlds mythology. And I was expecting a very profound answer, Paul, and I am slightly disappointed because your answer was, look, I think there's a lot more wrapped up in that than anybody realizes. And then you moved on to the next question. And fair enough. It was an excellent answer, to be honest, right? It was like, yeah, like, you want a dissertation on that? Because it's going to be several pages.
I mean, I noticed very quickly when I was going through John's work that, okay, two worlds. How many two worlds do we have? I mean, they just keep, I mean, this is so, you know, I've got some people who are always on me about dualism or non-dualism. And it's like, first you get one, and then you get two, and then you get three. I mean, how many things in life don't just flow this way? But I really do like your point about logic. I mean, Martin Luther basically said a very similar thing. He said, basically, reason is a horse, shall work for anyone. And you're exactly right. You create a closed world, you figure out that closed world. You know, today everyone loves talking about conspiracy theories. It's just another example of it. You know, once you decide that this group of people is managing the world for some nefarious outcome, you can play the entire world through that script and it all makes sense. And, you know, I think you said that nicely earlier when you talked, you know, about your mother's, you know, if she's having hallucinations or something like that, you sit, and I talk to schizophrenics all the time, and just sit and you listen, and, you know, they're absolutely convinced about all of the things they're telling you. It's like, okay, you know, I can't talk you out of that. And so I'm not going to bother trying. It doesn't work. The world doesn't work that way. So,
Right.
yeah, I think
Well,
that's true.
you can imagine some of the side effects of this, and some of which we're still realizing. Like, one of the interesting side effects of this type of thinking is that you come up with the conclusion that the world is a zero-sum game. And so something like distribution of wealth seems perfectly reasonable. If it's a zero-sum game, the only way you got it was from stealing it. That's the only way you got it, right? But then you can also see the downside. Like, the downside is, well, if it's a zero-sum game, why am I going to participate with you? Why am I going to do anything with you? I should just have the stuff. I don't have a reason to interact with you anymore. I don't have a drive. I don't have an aim, right? There's no compelling thing. And also, how are you going to, I'm going to, yeah, I'm going to have to kick myself later. How are you going to find meaning in a world like that, right? Because the world is knowable. And so why would you bother knowing it? It's a knowable world. It's closed. Not that you can know the whole thing, fair enough, but you could know any part of it that you wanted. And so where's the incentive to explore the world? And so I think that leads to nihilism. But it certainly explains socialism and this weird, like, socialism good. Like, what history are you reading? Like, what? What is wrong with you? Like, there's something wrong with your logic circuits. Socialism not good, and we know this. This is like this is a done thing. Like, this is a settled issue. And then that leads to nihilism because there's no reason to operate in the world, and people get closed off. And then I make a further argument that you can't navigate ethics, and that what happens because you can't navigate ethics is you keep putting the world in smaller and smaller identities to try and fit into an ethical framework. And ethics is bigger, not smaller. And so what happens is you eventually shrink your all identities down to a single variable. That's identity politics. That's what it is. And it's all explained by this particular phenomena where you're propositionally and procedurally stuck, and you can't get out of the propositional and procedural way of thinking. And then we think of propositions as objects and procedures as navigation and connection, right? So it's navigation, connection, but they're all linear. And that's what reduces the combinatorial explosion. so that you can manage the world. And you can say, and John made a very good point in his talk with you and Mary, where he said, some of properties of propositions already limit the things you can do with propositions. Okay, fair enough. Like, I'll grant him that. Absolutely. But they don't limit it enough, right? You need the procedural to limit the combinatorial explosion from just having a bunch of propositions. So I think that, to use John's terminology, that's how you reduce combinatorial explosion, through navigation and a closed set of connections. And I just mean closed in that it's determinable, right? It's not infinite.
Yeah.
And then that makes that side of the brain, the left brain discrete processing side, kind of make sense.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And then you need the other side of the brain. Obviously, we have two sides for a reason.
We've got the suchness and the moreness.
Yes. Yes.
I'm learning the fancy Vervaeke words.
Yeah, that's very good. Very good. You pass. I give you an A for fancy Vervaeke words. So that's the suchness, right? Things as they are.
Yep.
And then the moreness, the right brain, continuous processing.
Yep.
Parabolic, nonlinear connections. And then you can imagine that what that does is, unlike the left brain, which causes or is prone to reciprocal narrowing, to use another Vervaekeism, although it's one of his colleagues said it first, I think, right? The other side is the reciprocal opening, the moreness,
yep.
right? And so it's really weird to me that John doesn't see the parallels here, or that to the extent he sees the parallels, he disagrees with our model. So there you have participatory, which is movement, and you can participate in a conversation, but that's a movement too. Like, conversation is a dance to some extent, right? And then you have, and it's constrained, like you can only move like so far, so fast, right, in so many directions. But there's a lot more, and there's a fluidity to movement. That's where the continuous signal processing comes in. There's a lot more to it.
So the participatory is in some ways parallel to the procedural. Procedural is linear. Participatory is continuous movement. It's you're touching and you're moving in and out, and you can see very much why you would want these two. You would want both of these. You would very much want both of these living in a world like we live in. So keep going.
Well, it's interesting that you went there, because that's where Jess P went with his model, and it's very upsetting in a good way, right? It's rubbing up against our. So what we're doing is we're saying participatory is movement, and that's equivalent to propositions. Instead, I'm not sure that we're right. I'm not sure Jess isn't right. Like, I have no idea, right? And then what we're doing is we're saying parabolic is the navigation component. So parabolic maps up with procedure. And the reason why we're saying that is because we're putting navigation and connection in place. And so when you're moving around, how do you know what moves to make, right? How do you reduce the combinatorial explosion of all the possible movements in this space? And so if you look at, I know I sent you the slide along. If you look at the slide, that's where movement and navigation comes from. So we map it differently. And I know Jess's model is really good. I really like it. So I'm really upset that I literally upset, like they're rubbing against each other, and I don't know whose is better, right?
Huh.
And maybe there's no conflict, but the parabolic is the thing that, these patterns, they're small patterns, right? So these patterns that you get to engage with are the things that allow you to reduce combinatorial explosion in participation. And I did that with Mary in our second talk, right? Where I just, what did I say, boo or something, and she went and she jumped, and
yeah,
right.
Yeah.
And I did that on purpose, because I can do anything in a conversation with you, Paul. I can do anything. I could just rip my shirt off right now. And how would you know that that was wrong among all the possibilities? Well, I would argue that's the parabolic navigation. We have these patterns that we follow. And, you can go into, well, they're really cultural patterns, because a lot of people do. And I'm like, yeah, I don't care where they come from. That really doesn't matter. The fact that they exist is interesting.
Well, cultural just begs the question, because, okay, why do we know that ripping your shirt off in the middle of this conversation would be, and I'm high in openness, so it'd be, oh, that's interesting. He just ripped his shirt off in the middle of this. I've never had somebody rip their shirt off in the middle of a conversation. So at least not a conversation like this. So, maybe if we're in gym class and we're going shirts and skins, well, then maybe, but I liked, it's interesting that I put up the diagram that you sent me, and I really like this diagram because it it helps me sort of, okay, get a sense of what you guys are developing here. And you know, the this is of course Vervaeke's 4 Ps, and we have to use Ps because now we've started using Ps. So that's how we're reducing our combinatorial explosion of fancy Vervaeke words. Um, and the parabolic is standing in for the perspectival.
Well, we drop it below, right?
Right.
What John's doing is he seems to be adding a spectralization, and maybe at the top of the stack somewhere outside of this particular model, right? And Manuel, who's just like, I can't do any of this without Manuel's help. Manuel is so brilliant, and he's so good at being disagreeable when I need to be disagreed with. It's wonderful. We realized that without a perspective, without a frame, which I loved your video, Frames on the Elephant's Nose. Like, if you're interested in this topic, you really push, in my mind, you push the parabolic forward, right? The frame has to come before the knowledge, because
Right.
knowledge can't exist outside of a frame.
Right.
I don't know why that, like,
Right.
I don't know why John is so resistant to this. I think it's just definition. He just defines a lot of stuff in perspectival that I think is A, not the same stuff, and B, doesn't belong there, right? And that's what Manuel and I always get upset about when he when he talks about this. We're like, no, that's not how you should lay it out.
Hmm.
And maybe for Cog Sci, he should lay it out exactly the way he's doing it. I don't know. Like I
Yeah.
said, I'm not going to lose any friends, any Cog Sci friends over this. That's for sure.
Yeah.
So it's a low barrier of entry. And then the perspectival capacity is really important, because what we see is in meditation, you are training aspects of your perspectival capacity. And once you have that, you can take the knowledge that you already have and participate with it differently, or
Hmm.
participate with it at all. I think one of the problems, one way to frame the problems that you see in the world, is that people are not participating with the knowledge that they have. When somebody sees a video that shows a bunch of things happening, and somebody goes, no, that video's been debunked, and you're like, how do you debunk a video? Like, are you telling me I'm not seeing what I'm seeing? They're not participating with the information, right? They don't have a connection to that information. Whatever linear relationship they've made on the other side of their brain is taking precedence over the possible relationships. And then you can imagine something like a parable. I think the structure of a parable is something like, you get into the narrative or the story, however you want to frame it. I know we're not doing good at defining those particular words. Um, and then you have choices in the middle, right? And those choices give you options that you wouldn't have if you were making a logical argument, for example. And then there's results, and then there's potential results that you see inside the story. And so it gives it a richness and a depth, right? We use those words. And that's what enables this training of your parabolic, because you see these little patterns all over the place. And then it's interesting, because John did a talk with Jacob Kashir, and he actually was nice enough to come on our Discord server and do a Q&A with us too. And he tells this story, right? He goes into he's stuck in Greece during COVID. He goes into the Greek Orthodox Church, and he sees these things, and these symbols are up there, and they're gilded in gold, or whatever the crazy Orthodox people do. I don't know. They're beautiful churches, though. I love them, right? And he says explicitly, no transformation. He said, I understood what I was seeing, and it was very beautiful, and I got a sense for it. He said, but I go outside, and then I'm transformed. And I
Hmm.
said, yeah, because you saw the patterns in the church, and you saw them glorified in the church. You saw them being sacred, right? Occupying a sacred space, I should say, in the church. And then you see those same patterns in the world. And that causes an insight,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
now you're relating to the same patterns in the
Right.
world differently. Nothing's changed.
Right.
The only thing that's changed is your perspectival capacity has increased. And so that's why I think that's what I think is happening in meditation. Most meditation, especially with things like metta, where you're doing the suchness and the moreness and things like that, that's what that is. You're training your perspectival capacity to open and close and open and close.
Hmm.
And John talks about this in the meditation, so I'm surprised he doesn't seem to be making that connection the way we are. And then that's what we think the perspectival does, and why it's important, and why even John, I think, has a hard time figuring out which comes first: participation or perspective or procedural.
Yeah.
He couches it different ways down different trees, and I'm
Yeah.
like, no, the four types of knowing should be equal. What should change is the perspective should be down below, because it's common to all of them, and he just doesn't believe that. He's trying to solve everything, I think, with rationality.
Interesting. Well, it's very interesting to me too, because I hate to, when I first listened to you talk about the parabolic, it was like, okay, what are we going to, where does a parabola fit in? And then I listened a little bit more. Okay, no, we're talking about parables. And then of course I read, I think I've, in my messiness of my office, of course, I never put anything. I picked up this book on local knowledge, and this sort of connected me to Neil Postman and Amusing Ourselves to Death, because he was Neil Postman and Amusing Ourselves to Death, and written in the 80s. He was decrying the stupid combinatorial explosion of cable television, and he was lamenting the loss of the literate culture of earlier New England, which was interesting. But he went on this description about proverbs. So throw another P in the world. What happens when you go into the church and you see the patterns, and then you step out of the church, and that's where you have the insight, is there is a degree of authority in that. And for human beings, for a lot of us, a lot of this authority is that which gets there first. Okay, it's the first insight we have, because that then lays down the pattern in us, and every new pattern that comes has to, in a sense, come up against and compete with this other pattern, because we see a pattern, we go out into the world, we see the pattern laid out, we make this parabolic connection, and we say, oh, so then now suddenly we have found and something with authority. We have found a pattern, and we've said, this pattern has precedence over a bunch of these other patterns because this pattern worked. And so then we keep using that pattern until something doesn't work. And how we know, and of course it's the continuous processing part of the brain that is always asking the question, does this work? Does this work? Does this work? How do I know if this works? And because it's not linear, and that's, when it gets terribly linear, well, that's when you really get into trouble. So then you get your parables. Jesus tells these parables, and so, okay, and all what these parables are these little patterns, these little stories that have little patterns, very similar to what proverbs are. Proverbs are even simpler than parables. Parables, you often need you need a number of sentences in order to construct the whole little world. A parable is usually one sentence, or even not even a whole sentence. You have this little phrase, a stitch in time saves nine. There's a tiny little pattern. And once Ben Franklin says it, now suddenly it has a degree of authority. And I like your system that you're laying out here. And of course, I got into this when I heard Mary say things like, she's just watching children. And of course, psychologists have always known, if you want to have an insight into how people think, watch children, because they haven't they haven't it's a little bit simpler, and you can watch the cake as it's being made. And boys are dogs and girls are cats. Huh. Why? Is it size? Is it aggression? Is it, what is in, and again, we get into the Vervaeke stuff. What is dogness? What is catness? Daddy, of course, the more famous one now from Mary, daddy's the knife, mommy's the fork, baby's the spoon. And then, okay, well, what in fact are these relationships? What in fact are these patterns? And and I think also your point where Vervaeke and Peterson sort of coming together, a lot of people, and I think they'll have the same challenge with this video, which is why I wanted to talk about your life, because now suddenly all of these other theories, to whatever degree anybody's actually making any real connection between the story of your life, which they can actually connect with, And that's why people tell their stories, because now we have a little parable, which is the story of Mark's life and all the little interesting things. And we find all of those little things. Oh, he was homeless in a car. Oh, he worked in UPS and he doesn't like unions. Oh, all of those things suddenly, draw you into us. And so that we care to hear about, you know, your 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 little feud with Vervaeke about which peas are most are most pertinent to the conversation. And now, okay, so how does then this connect up with Peterson? Well, the thing about Peterson was that these patterns are in fact very old, and these patterns get encoded in us physiologically by virtue of history before us, gets encoded into us culturally by virtue of the stories we tell. And anyone who is born into this world and thinking they're just seeing the world through fresh eyes, which in a sense this very linear mode tends to indulge us in, Peterson comes along and says, "Oh no, my friend, you are the heir of far more before you opened your little eyes and had any little sense of awareness that you could actually participate in this." And you know, all of these, all of this modernistic, I'm going to argue this from first principles as a way of attaining certainty, and getting, moving all the things away and getting down to this this Cartesian nub upon which I will construct my universe. No, it's not going to go that way. And you can do this if you want, but you should have an understanding of exactly what you're doing, which is what people who are outside those systems look at them and say, oh, well, they're just fixated on this point or that point, and they've constructed their world around it. And of course, religious people do this, irreligious people do this. This is simply how human beings try to figure out how to construct their world. And so then we continue on with this journey of, okay, well, how can I know the truth? How can I actually learn something? How can I actually improve? Which again, then we're going to point to Sevilla over there in terms of value. How on earth am I going to discover value and actually seek value and make steps up a hierarchy? So I just wanted I hope that, because I watched a friend of my Discord who actually teaches psychology here, and he listened to the conversation with John and Mary and I. And of course, Mary wanted to start that talk. So she talks for a long time. And then the comment from my friend was, I didn't understand anything Mary said until John explained it. And it's like, okay. So we got a lot of that going on right here.
Yeah.
It's very interesting.
It is. And you can imagine too that if you have a literal interpretation of the Bible, like a strictly literal interpretation of a text, then you can't participate with it. And you can't participate with the other people that are participating with it. You've locked yourself out of that participation, which is a very strange thing, right? And then the other thing is that when you're in the parabolic, you have choices. That's the whole thing. You have agency. And what does it mean to participate in the world? What does that give you really? Well, I would argue it gives you values. Like you can't understand value on the other side of the brain in the scientifio mode. Like there's no values
which is Wilfred Seller's big point, that once you close that one eye to see the world through one side of your brain, you can do a lot, but you're always sneaking peeks, because I can do a lot. I want to do this, but I'm not going to admit it. You had to peek. You just had to peek. And right. but to come back to the literal thing with respect to religion, because a part of what brought me to this was that I watched these two camps go on about literalism. And I said, no, first of all, the literalists they're working parabolically as well, because all they have done is they've constructed a particular system. And I would really annoy certain Christians because I said, oh, you're all excited about Genesis 1. Well, let me quote you some things about, what the Apostle Paul says. Unless you believe with your heart and profess with your lips. I said, do you believe with your heart? Well, that's a figure of speech. Oh, well, I thought you took the Bible literally, that you believe with I thought this organ pumped blood. Oh, no, but that's language. Ah, Yes, that's language. And then people will then flip the other side and say, oh, you don't believe in the resurrection of Jesus Christ. No, that's not what I'm saying at all. I'm just saying that this whole game, that at least on the church side of things, that we've been playing for the last 200 years about literal, that's just another, that certain kinds of literalism are just another parable, and it's a frame through which they are trying to select and unselect things. And again, we're all dealing with the combinatorial explosion of every text that we have to deal with, and the world, which again, Peterson, Sam Harris in those debates basically said, oh, but the combinatorial explosion of these, I can read this text of the Bible and make it mean anything. And Peterson turns around and says, yes, and you can do that with everything else in the world too. And again, that's where the Peterson canon and the Vervaeke canon really do fit together here.
Yeah, yeah, and it's interesting too. I mean, one thing we should probably note that I neglected to note earlier is that language is propositional and procedural. And so it's really easy. And I think even John falls prey to this more often than I would expect. It's real easy to confuse the thing for the description of the thing, right? Like that's real easy. But a lot of what you described is the same as is ought,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like, yeah, the left brain can describe what is,
Yeah.
and you need the right brain to describe what's ought. Jonathan Peugeot just did a brilliant video, right? And he just lays it all out. He says, you can have a science of how to kill the most people most efficiently. We've done that before. It works really well. You know what, though, to Peterson's point, maybe everything we can do shouldn't be considered science.
Yeah.
Like science shouldn't be the set of every possible thing you can do.
Yeah.
That seems reasonable too. Like I think, people didn't take Peterson seriously enough about that, or didn't hear that message loud enough.
Yeah.
It's like his most important message, in my opinion, is maybe there are things that we should call not science for the purpose of making sure that we don't wipe each other out. And that's where he came at it from. It's interesting because I was thinking a lot of the same things Peterson was thinking at the same age, right? Because we kind of grew up around the same time, right? With the same, like the world is going to end. They're going to set off the nukes, any minute now.
Yep.
But the interesting thing about choice and about participation is when you have choice, which is the parabolic, and when you can participate, now instead of operating in a closed world where everything is certain, you're trading off some certainty, dangerous, absolutely. I understand. Like, don't do this lightly. Agreed. Don't integrate your shadow by watching maps of meaning, unless you're careful about it. What you get is possibility and potential and access to potential, right? And now you can see more in the text. Now you can understand more. Like, who's dumber, the person who reads the Bible literally, or the person who can extract more than just the literal interpretation of the Bible? Because under the scientific rubric, which I'm not a big fan of anymore, I used to be, the person who understands the metaphor, the parabolic, the symbolism, is more information, and more information is better. Now, I don't think more information is better, but even if you look at it scientifically, science should question itself at that point. Yeah. And I think that's the problem, is that when you talk about something like the two worlds mythology, which is also in this chart, kind of, although I've had some objections about the bar down at the bottom, right? It goes from static to dynamic. That's an attempt to fix this problem around this two worlds mythology question, right? And maybe it should be a circle with a gradient, from white in the center to black outside, or something, right?
Tell me how you're connecting this with the two worlds mythology.
Yep, absolutely. It is connected exactly as you see. But let me fix the two worlds mythology first, and then I'll go over this.
Okay.
And John, I think John knows this, so it's really weird. The two worlds mythology is a scientific construction of the Enlightenment. It wasn't a thing in ancient Greece. They didn't think that way. So where did it come from?
Okay,
it came from
which
science.
two worlds? Because there's a lot of two worlds mythologies that we're dealing with here. Because
right. I'm going to fix them all.
Okay.
I'm going to fix them all. It's a spectrum, right? And so you go from static stuff. We talked about static with the discrete processing on one side, to dynamic stuff. And, everybody gets tripped up on this. No, Mark, material things are the things I have the most control over. And I go, okay, if I have a cup, I can't make it into a dragon, right? If I imagine a cup, I can make it into a dragon. Which do I have more control over? The cup that's always going to be a cup because it's material, or the cup in my head that I can make into a dragon and then color the dragon and then turn it into rain and then make a rainbow? Obviously, you have more control in your head, we'll say, than you have over the material world. And so that's where I get that from. And there's a blending and a mixing, right? And so once you understand that, you can imagine something like, if there are forces, and this is very Jungian, right? If there are forces in your head that deny or are, you know, in opposition to the material things, but you behave as though they're true, you're just going to have this cognitive dissonance. But cognitive dissonance can go on for a long time. You know, there were Nazis long after the war, the end of the war, who defended Nazism, right? Like these things, there is still people who defend the Soviet way of doing things, right? There's still people that hold on to that stuff, even though there's, materially it didn't work. Like it just doesn't work. Whatever else you want to say about it, the system failed. And we know the system had to fail in some cases. And people still hold on to those ideas. They're stuck in the static, they're stuck in the material, and they don't have the flexibility of the ephemeral. And you can go the other too far the other way. So like my mother, she's just seeing what she's seeing, right? And then she's justifying it all in the material world. She used to ask a lot of times, did you see that? And the interesting thing is, about half the time I'd see something, and the other half the time, almost without fail, I wouldn't be looking. And so I would tell her, no, no, I was looking down, and she'd get very upset. And I was like, why are you mad that I was preoccupied or looking out the side window? And now I know, like now it's like click. Oh, she didn't know if what she was seeing was in the ephemeral realm, we'll say, as opposed to the static realm or material realm. That makes sense now. Now, how some of her behavior makes a lot more sense to me. It's too bad it came too late to, and maybe knowing it wouldn't have helped me, right? I think I dealt with it the way I dealt with it, and then obviously she had a very good sense for the parabolic. Perhaps she saw things a little too parabolically at times. On the other hand, she could make some amazing predictions, and I was always like, I don't know how you knew that, but you were dead on, and
Yeah.
like that wasn't stuff you had control over, so I don't know what you were seeing.
Yeah. Oh, this is interesting.
So the two worlds gradient, where it's a continuum, right? And it's a continuous thing. That sort of kind of explains things like shadow projection in psychology, right? Like, oh, you have this ephemeral view of the world that you're holding on to, and you're casting that into the material world, maybe onto another person, in fact, right? Which is what
Yeah.
happens a lot with Manuel and I in particular, seem to be mirrors. So when people talk to us, they say, you said that you opposed X. I was like, nobody ever said any of that. In some cases, they're saying you said the following words, and we didn't say words that were even like that. People get really crazy with their projections, but the projection is they're not in touch with the ephemeral world, so they don't know about it. So it's possessing them in some sense. It's really ruling what they do and how they behave.
Right. Right. Well, and even this stuff gets so tricky because I mean, there's a way in which the material is less control. I mean, matter resists us in some ways,
Yep.
yet also matter is enormously compliant in other ways. The ore, everything that took to come into this music stand has been completely colonized by the ephemeral desire that my cell phone can sit right up here at my desk, and I even have a little hole here to run a little cord through. Um, and so and in other ways, ideas, in a very Platonic way, ideas are enormously static. I mean, C.S. Lewis made the point that every every love in this world will end in betrayal or death, but love is extremely static, the thing itself. But then you've got the point well taken about, well, there's the thing itself, which now we're getting into Kantian. I can't get at that thing itself because I'm trapped over here. So no, this is I think you guys are progressing the conversation in this. And John, of course, knows that. John knows that this is, I mean, he's been in academia way too long to not know that this, in fact, is the way that we do this. He's not going to just turn over and capitulate until you guys can somehow convince him. But in many ways, part of the game is that we've all got all of these observers. And so in a very Thomas Kuhnian way, we're all watching and watching and waiting for a, the little paradigm in this little corner of the internet to sort of flip around. And then of course, John will be on the outside and others will be on the inside, and he'll have to make a new video thing, and on and on. Of course, we've got status. And of course, now you got on Paul Vanderklay's channel. So you're moving up the status hierarchy, and and on and on and on and on we go. But I think this is, I, I have a better understanding now of where you guys are coming at this and the system that you've laid out here, which is of course a very left brain system, because this is, I mean, we need to have these little boxes, and we need to have these little words, and we need to have these little diagrams, and I mean, we're just constantly flipping between these two sides of the brain. But I care about this. All that caring is only coming from the continual processing, because the caring is always, I watched Eric Weinstein this morning on Twitter, okay, time to start Unity, 2024. It's like we're one day into it, and it was okay. We're leaning into the future because that's part of this continuous processing. So anyway, no, this is really helpful stuff. I appreciate this.
Yeah, no, and I really appreciate the audience and the reach, because you have a lot of reach. And I thought, I just Jess did his little diagram, and I was like, oh, I've had my diagram in my head for months. Why didn't I put it on paper? And I finally put it on paper. And then, Frost Muffin on our server was like, oh, I prettied it up, and I'm like, oh, I could make it a little prettier, right? So I made it a little prettier, right? And I'm like putting some text on the slide, and we have bigger models. We have historical grounding and realm of transformative coupling and all these other things, because again, our goal is to repeat what Peterson did for more people who are
Right.
stuck, right, and reach more audience in different ways. And we're still experimenting with our larger model sets, not just this model, but the other models that we have, to try and figure out if we can do that and how to best do that. And part of that project is building community, and like we're really learning that the two big things are sort of participation and integration, right? And integration is something like Peterson talks about, do people have ideas, or do ideas have people? And then that's in some of John's coursework. So he gives a meditation course, which is excellent. I really highly recommend it. But he also has another course, Cultivating Wisdom. And in there, that's the Greek tradition, right? That's Epicurus and the Stoics, and then Neoplatonists. I haven't actually read the whole book yet. I'm still working on it, guys. But in there, there's a practice called maximization, where you take a maxim, like a short saying, right, and you rewrite it. It's like, oh, you're trying to own the idea. You're trying to participate in the thought, relate it to and then make it your own. Oh, that's different from just saying, oh, what is it, and absorbing it. Now you're integrating it. So this integration process is very important to us. And we've been trying to do things like set intentions. That's aim. Peterson talks about that, right? Integration, that's sitting with something. After you've meditated, we sit quietly for a minute, eyes open, reintegrating. There's a process John talked about. I don't think it was a formal lesson, but it was really transformative to my life anyway. We talks about savoring, right? And I'm like, oh, savoring. And I took a trip to Croatia recently, and we had a wonderful time savoring by the sea, smelling the salt water. And every once in a while, the pine trees would waft over, and we're sitting on the beach, right? And in the sun setting, and I was just amazed. Like, I thought, words, come on, this is parabolic. This is savoring, right? And savoring is all about, in my opinion, making those parabolic connections, right? Really feeling your oneness with nature, right? And the wonder of nature, the awe of nature at the same time, because there's all these possibilities. And one of the projects we're embarking on is this thing called the Meaning Community, and we've got a domain. We don't quite have the website ready for prime time yet, but we're trying to get people involved in that and push them off to the places they need to go, because not everybody's going to cohere to the scientific method, right? Not everyone's going to hear John's stuff. Some people are going to want to go with Rafe Kelly and go out in the woods and do parkour, right? Some people are going to want to go to Bridges of Meaning and talk to the crazy Christians about crazy Christian things, right? And we're trying to facilitate all that. Like, I was really interested in your talk with Jonathan Pajot, because he's got Symbolic World,
Yep.
and you've got this. And I was a little disappointed, Paul, because you spent the whole middle of the video talking about, other things, and they were very important things. But I was like, oh, they're going to talk for like an hour about how to build community.
What would you
And
like us
then
to
it didn't
talk
work
about?
out that way.
How to
Well,
build community?
yeah, well, yeah. I mean, no, in general, I mean, I think, and everybody has this sense. I mean, there's lots of problems with it, but building community in general, I think, is the thing. Like, that's important. John talks about it, communitas. He's very happy, I think, that we built the Sangha, that we built communitas on the Discord server, and we need to find more ways to do that. And then, part of my disappointment is nobody wants to step up and say, I'll be the face of this thing. I'll fill the Peterson-sized hole in the internet, or however you want to phrase it. Right? Because everyone's afraid of two things: structure and charisma. A lot of people are anti-structuralists. And I can imagine you be an anti-structuralist if you were stuck on the left side of your brain in propositions and procedures, because structures have failed. So now you're like, oh, structure bad, right? Like, fascism, structure bad, right? But and charisma, like, well, yeah, the dangers of charisma are obvious, right? But is there a way around that? Like, this is like the two worlds mythology thing. Like, what if we live in a continuum between static and dynamic, and you just don't have a choice about that, and you have to make do as best you can, right? And what if there's a bunch of things like that that stack up, where you just have to make do as best you can and use the skills that you have? I think charisma is the same thing. Like, look, you want to build communities, you want people to come to the communities, you have to have people there, and those people have to have certain skills and a certain level of charisma, and you have to give people structure, because structure allows you safety to participate. A lot of people are afraid to jump in and build things. Builders are an archetype. I think maybe Ayn Rand, I'm kind of an Ayn Rand fan, has the archetype of the builder in her stories. Like, I think that's what those are. Those are builder archetypes, and they build things. And building things allows people to participate in the most efficient way possible, right? Because maybe they can't, run the accounting of a business. But once there's a vision for a business, and you need accounting, you can get accounting, and then you've got your creative artists over here, and they can do their creative artistry, right? And that's how you mix these different personality types, a la Peterson, to make a structure that's bigger, a whole that's bigger than the sum of the parts. And that's sort of what we're trying to do with the meaning community stuff, is to build this meaning community up. John has this lovely vision of linking up all of these communities together and having a hub for that, and we're trying to do that. I'm working with Brett, who is the creator of the Awaiting for the Meaning Crisis Discord server, where we're in association with the Vervaeke Foundation, John's little foundation there, and we're trying to build to get these things together and to shepherd people through the process of finding where their next step is, and then having a place to go back to if it turns out that that first thing they went to wasn't right for them, right? And helping them to slot into whatever community, and maybe building more communities like that with more practices. We're very focused on practices on the Awakening from the Meaning Crisis Discord. We meditate every day. We've got a group Lectio Divina, which is something that John resurrected from Catholicism, and then we turned into a group practice on the server. So we're doing some of this co-creation, right? Because you can co-create once you can participate parabolically. You have options, right? You can do that co-creation in participation with others. And then we're trying to do more practices. We have some circling stuff going on. We got a bunch of stuff, and we'd love for people to participate. I'd love to have too many people, because then I can just make more groups, right? And because you want to keep the groups relatively small. But that's sort of the phase project that we're on, and we're early days. I wish we were further along, but these things always, as you know, take way more time than you can imagine, right?
They
Because
take a
things
lot
happen.
of time. They take a lot of time. It's a lot of,
Right.
it's a lot of, it's a lot of work, and it's a lot of the kind of work that doesn't necessarily look to people like it's important or fruitful, but it's people are subtle and complex and timid and ambitious and all of those things together, and so it takes a little bit of time to knit things together and knit people together. So you should definitely send me links that you want me to include in this video, and people can, part of the difficulty that I've seen as a pastor is that the Discord the Discord technology isn't in it. We're appropriating it. It's free, and that way it's wonderfully scalable, and we can do a lot with it. But there are limits to what we can seem to do with it, and we're always pushing those limits. And I've been pleasantly surprised regularly how much we've been able to do with it. I really have been surprised, and I was more pessimistic initially, but the kinds of things that I'm seeing are really, give me a sense of optimism. So no, I think you laid it out really well. So, well, thank you, Mark. This has been fun, and again, now I have a much better sense of you than I had at first, and I wish you lived in Sacramento, but because you would, there are people I want you to meet. Maybe y'all wouldn't get along because you're also low in agreeableness, but I've been pleasantly surprised how well low and agreeable people can actually work together, given the right
Yes.
structure, given the right
Yes.
project. So, and that's been a cool thing. So, any other things you want to get in that you have to say, oh, I talked to Paul and we didn't go here.
Oh, well, there's so many places we didn't go, Paul, but that's okay.
Okay.
I think this is good enough for now, and I really appreciate you making the time to talk to me in particular and to go over this stuff, and making time to go over the stuff, because I know normally you just want to talk to people the first few times. So I appreciate that affordance. And it's you're a wonderful person, and I was telling people the other day, I said, man, if there's anybody who doesn't like Paul, I'm immediately suspicious of them. Like, what's wrong with that person? Like,
they're out there. You can especially find them on Twitter, apparently.
are you sure they're not zombies? Are they real people?
Oh, I think they're pretty real.
They're real enough.
They're real enough. That's right. They're real enough. So yeah, send me those links. I'll probably put this out on Monday, I'm thinking.
Great.
And Monday morning. And I'm really kind of, it's always, and this is part of the frustration of trying to scale something up, which is, yeah, if I'm doing a talk with Jordan Peterson, whoosh. And I've been amazed at the interest in randos, as it were. And so to whatever degree I can help you guys in your project, I'd love to see what I can do. So.
Oh, great. Well,
All
thank
right.
you so much, Paul.
So again, send me those links, and I will post this Monday, and we'll see where this goes.
Thank you.
Take care, Mark.
See ya.
Bye-bye.